I came out of anesthesia at 2:14 in the morning, and the first thing I noticed, before the nurses, before the pain, before the unfamiliar smell of the recovery ward, was a Scotiabank fraud alert lighting up my entire phone screen. $14,350. Fairmont Tremblant. Posted between 11:40 in the evening and 1:05 in the morning, while I was unconscious on a surgical table at Hamilton General. My hands were still shaking from whatever they had put in the IV. It took me 3 tries to dial my husband's number. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me, because it was the middle of the night, and he had told me before I was admitted that he was going to stay home and wait for news. His voice sounded awake and easy. The way it sounds when you've been laughing at something, and the sound is still sitting in your chest. "Hey," he said, "how are you feeling?" I told him about the notification. I told him the amount. I could hear music in the background, something with bass, and voices behind it, and the kind of ambient noise that only happens indoors somewhere, that isn't a house. "Relax," he said. "I'm handling some work stuff, we can talk in the morning." He ended the call. I lay in the recovery ward in the dark and stared at my phone until the screen went black. The heart monitor next to me beeped at a pace that felt very loud for 2 in the morning. A nurse came by, introduced herself as Deborah, checked my dressing and my blood pressure, and asked if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. I didn't know how to say what was actually happening, so I said the thing that required the least explanation. I opened Instagram instead of sleeping. The first post I saw had gone up 40 minutes earlier. My sister-in-law, in a cream puffer coat, standing on a snow-dusted balcony with a wine glass and a mountain backdrop. The caption said, "Finally, this is the reset we all needed." The second post was from my husband. He and his younger brother, arms around each other, standing in front of the stone fireplace in the main lobby of the Fairmont Tremblant. They were grinning. There were 4 other family members visible at the edge of the frame. Champagne flutes, ski passes clipped to everyone's jackets. I went back to my banking app. The charges had started at 7:49 in the evening. Room deposit, premium ski-in package, private dining reservation. The next charge came through at 12:03 in the morning, while I was in surgery. Spa treatments, 2 ski equipment rentals, a wine pairing add-on for dinner the following night. Then 2 restaurant charges. Then a charge for snowmobile excursions. The spending had been as steady and unhurried as someone who expected not to be interrupted. I tried my husband again, voicemail. I tried my sister-in-law, 6 rings, then voicemail. I left a message I am not particularly proud of in terms of composure, but I had just had emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix, alone, in the middle of the night, so I gave myself that one. I didn't sleep. By the time Deborah came back in the morning with a breakfast tray and told me I had some color back, I had read every Instagram caption posted from Mont Tremblant by every person on that trip. There were 6 of them. My husband, his older sister, his younger brother, aunt, and 2 cousins. 6 people, my card. My husband called at 10:30 that morning. He sounded more careful this time, measured, the way people sound when they've had a few hours to prepare a version of events. "You knew about this trip," he said. "We talked about it months ago." "Was the deposit on my card?" "We booked it together." "I have no memory of that." "Tamara." He said my name the way people do when they want you to feel like the unreasonable one. He told me the non-refundable deposit had been nearly $4,000. He told me the paramedics had described the surgery as routine. He told me his sister had been planning this trip for over a year, and that canceling at the last minute over something the doctors had called routine would have been unfair to an entire family who had been looking forward to it. He used the word routine 4 times, I counted. I let him finish. Then I asked him quietly whether he had taken my credit card out of my wallet before he left for the airport. He said of course not. I told him to enjoy the rest of his trip and hung up. Then I called my brother-in-law. He picked up right away. There was wind noise behind him, like he was outside somewhere on a slope. I asked him to confirm what I'd seen, whether they were all at Tremblant on my card. He laughed, not unkindly, but the way someone laughs when they've decided a situation is manageable. "Come on," he said. "By the time we're back, you'll be feeling way better and this whole thing will just be a story." "I had emergency surgery last night." "Yeah," he mentioned. "But you're out now, right? You're okay?" He didn't wait for an answer. "The mountain's incredible, by the way. You would have loved it up here." He hung up to go ski. I called my husband's aunt next. She sighed through the phone, like I was inconveniencing her morning. She said everyone had been looking forward to this trip, and that the timing was unfortunate, and that these things happen. She said I should focus on my recovery, rather than upsetting people who were just trying to have a nice vacation. Then she hung up to go have a nice vacation. The days in the hospital moved slowly after that. Every morning I opened my eyes hoping to see someone in my doorway, my husband, or even one of them, any of them, with even the most basic kind of apology. I listened for footsteps that sounded purposeful. They always belonged to nurses or doctors, or the volunteer who came around with a cart of books and magazines. The nurses figured out quickly that I had no visitors. Deborah started staying a little longer when she came in for checks, making conversation about small things. Another nurse, Priscilla, sat with me for 20 minutes during her break, after noticing I had been staring at the window for a long time without moving. She asked if there was someone she could call for me. I said there was one person. In the room next to mine, an older man had a steady rotation of family all day. His children took shifts, bringing homemade food in containers, staying through visiting hours and a little past. His wife was there every morning from 9 until the nurses gently suggested she head home and rest. Every time I heard them laughing together through the wall, I put my earbuds in. My phone kept buzzing. For a split second, every notification gave me the same stupid flicker of hope. Maybe this time it was an apology. Maybe this time someone had actually thought about where I was. Instead it was a photo of everyone at a long dinner table covered in fondue pots and wine bottles. Then a reel of my brother-in-law, attempting to snowboard for the first time. Then a photo of my husband and his sister at the top of a run, with the mountains stretching out behind them. Every image was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are happening to someone else using your money. The only messages I received from them were practical. My husband texted once to ask if the internet bill was on autopay because he couldn't remember the login. My sister-in-law messaged to ask where I'd bought the carry-on I'd used for a trip the previous summer because she was shopping for luggage and liked the style of it. Neither of them asked how I was doing. I stared at those messages for a long time. The fraud alert had been shocking. These two small, ordinary requests, arriving while I was in a hospital bed 3 days post-surgery, were something different. They told me I had stopped being a person to them and become a resource, an account to check, a memory to mine for information. My mother arrived on the afternoon of the second day. She had driven from her apartment in Burlington in under 40 minutes, which meant she had not observed the posted speed limit on the QEW with any consistency. She came in carrying a Fortino's bag with a thermos of soup she'd heated at home, a container of crackers, and the kind of expression on her face that told me she had spent the drive preparing herself to be useful rather than upset. She pulled her chair directly to my bedside, sat down, took my hand, and waited. She didn't say anything until I had told her everything. She didn't flinch at the numbers, didn't interrupt, didn't offer explanations for what my husband might have been thinking. She just listened until I was done. Then she said, "All right, we're going to be smart about this." She stayed 4 hours. She helped me eat the soup. She wrote down the Scotiabank fraud line number in her actual paper agenda, because she didn't trust herself to remember it. She didn't let me spiral for long, before redirecting me to the next concrete step. When my husband's aunt sent me a message that afternoon, saying she hoped I wouldn't make this into something dramatic, my mother read it over my shoulder, said nothing for a moment, and quietly helped me screenshot it, without composing a reply. I called the fraud line 2 mornings later early, before the ward got busy. The specialist walked me through what he needed. I had my hospital admission paperwork, my OHIP card number, the time my surgery began, and the time I came out of recovery. He put me on hold twice. When he came back, he told me he was opening an investigation and flagging the charges as potentially unauthorized. He told me not to confront anyone involved or post about the situation. He said the fraud team would be in touch. I did not tell my husband. On the 4th day, my husband came to visit. He walked in around 4 in the afternoon, tan in the way people get after a few days on a mountain in February. He set a small paper bag from the Fairmont gift shop on my bedside table, and leaned down to kiss my forehead like this was a normal Wednesday. Inside the bag was a toque, burgundy and cream, with the Mont Tremblant Resort logo stitched above the brim. He had left the gift shop price tag on the inside, $22. "I thought it would be useful," he said, "for when you're back on your feet." I turned it over, found the tag, set it back in the bag. This was charged to my card? Well, everything was. He sat down in the chair and started talking about the trip. He was genuinely animated. He told me the skiing had been exceptional, that the visibility on the upper runs had been almost perfect every day. He described the fondue dinner, a snowshoe trail they tried one evening, a live music set in the resort village. He laughed, describing the night his brother slipped on the icy path between buildings and soaked his entire left leg in slush. Then he started talking about the cost of things. The lobby coffee at $12 a cup, the drinks at the mountaintop lodge, the room service markup that he felt had been unreasonable. He said next time they should look for somewhere with better value. My husband had spent $14,000 of my money. He was sitting at my hospital bedside, and he was listing the ways the resort had overcharged him. His sister and his brother arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a balloon bouquet that looked like it had come from the gift shop 2 floors down. They talked over each other, catching me up on highlights I had obviously missed. My brother-in-law was still laughing about the snowmobile excursion. My sister-in-law had photos on her phone she wanted to show me. They moved through the room like people visiting a friend who'd had a minor inconvenience, not someone who had been lying there alone since an emergency surgery they had been in the air for. Nobody said they were sorry, not once, not in passing, not as a qualifier before moving on to something else. My brother-in-law set a box of chocolates on my table. The large holiday box, still in the Resemblance gift shop bag, patted my hand and said, "We didn't forget about you." Then they all talked about the drive home and whether there'd be traffic on the 401. When they left, something inside me went very quiet. It wasn't grief exactly. It was more like resolution, the kind that comes when you stop hoping something will turn out differently and start seeing it clearly for what it is. I spent the next morning in the hospital business center on the 3rd floor, printing every bank statement I could access. I highlighted each charge against the corresponding time in my medical records. Deborah helped me request certified copies of my hospital documents through the patient portal, and they came through within 48 hours. The records showed, in precise clinical language, the exact time my surgery began, the duration, and when I regained consciousness in recovery. Not one of those charges could have been authorized by me. The documentation made that impossible to misread. I saved copies of everything in 3 places. I wasn't sure yet which of those copies would matter most. I kept all of them anyway. My mother drove me to a lawyer's office on my first day home from the hospital, while I was still moving slowly and wearing a compression wrap under my coat. The lawyer spread my documents across the conference table and read carefully, without rushing. When she finished, she told me my documentation was thorough. She explained that in Ontario, using another person's credit card without authorization could constitute fraud under the criminal code, regardless of marital status. She told me my civil claim was strong. She told me to keep gathering evidence, to stay quiet at home, and to let the investigation run its course. I followed her advice with a discipline I didn't know I had. 3 weeks into being home, the fraud investigator called with a specific question. Did I have security cameras on the property? We had 2. Front door and back deck, both installed 2 autumns earlier, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I had almost never thought about them after the day they went up. She asked me to pull up the footage from the evening I was taken to hospital by ambulance. I watched it alone at my kitchen table. The ambulance in the driveway, the paramedics walking me out on the stretcher, my husband following behind them to the front door, watching the ambulance pull away from the curb. He stood there until it turned the corner. Then he went back inside. 17 minutes later, the front camera showed him dragging his rolling suitcase to the front door. He went back in. 2 minutes after that, the kitchen camera, mounted above the back door, angled toward the entry, showed him walking to where my purse hung on the hook beside the door. He opened my purse, removed my wallet, held it open and took out 2 cards, then slid them into the breast pocket of his jacket. He put my wallet back in my purse and hung my purse exactly where it had been. Then he went back to the front door for his suitcase. He had left for the airport before I was on the surgical table. I sent the footage to my lawyer that evening. She forwarded it to the investigators the next morning and called me afterward. She said the investigator had described it as significant. On a Friday morning in April, I gave the go-ahead. My husband texted me at 11:45. His card had been declined at an Esso station on Barton Street. He wanted to know what was happening with the accounts. I read the message, set my phone face down, and finished my coffee. My sister-in-law called within the hour. Scotiabank had contacted her about specific charges connected to my account. She needed me to call the bank and let them know it had all been a family misunderstanding. I told her the investigation was already open, and I wasn't able to interfere with it. She called back twice more. I didn't answer. By afternoon, messages were pouring into a group thread I knew existed, because my husband had once accidentally screen-shared it during a video call. My husband's aunt was demanding to know who had spoken to the bank. My brother-in-law was asking whether they all needed to retain lawyers. My sister-in-law wrote that someone needed to fix this before the weekend. My husband replied that he was handling it. He came home at 6:30 looking like a man who had spent the day being blamed by people he thought were on his side. He told me we had shared finances. He told me he had rights. He said I was punishing him for something that had been a misunderstanding, and that someone had told him that as a married couple, my credit card was a marital asset, and he hadn't technically done anything wrong. I set my cup on the counter and looked at him. "There's a camera above the kitchen door," I said. He didn't say anything. "It records everything near the entryway." He sat down at the table. He didn't say anything else about marital assets. Later that evening, I could hear him in the living room on his phone. His sister joined the call, then his brother. What I heard through the door was not a conversation about what had happened to me. It was a conversation about who had suggested the trip first, who had confirmed it was fine, who had made the actual decision to go. Each of them was quietly building distance between themselves and the plan. The family that had stood together at the top of a mountain was now very carefully trying to not be standing in the same sentence. My lawyer called the following week with an update. The investigators had recovered a message thread from the days before the trip. She read 3 messages to me over the phone. My husband, 3 days before my hospital admission. "If they end up admitting her, we still go. We'll sort it out when we're back." His sister, "We've waited long enough for this." His brother, "She'll be fine. They're probably just being cautious." I sat with those 3 messages for a long time. Not because they surprised me. By that point, very little could. But because they answered the question I had been carrying since I woke up in the recovery ward at 2 in the morning. This had not been a rushed decision made in a panicked moment. It had been a plan, made in advance, with a contingency already built in. They had decided what they would do if I ended up hospitalized, and then they had done it without hesitating. The divorce proceedings in Ontario moved forward steadily. The fraud case was referred to Hamilton Police Service for review. 2 of the relatives retained their own lawyers, separately from my husband, each beginning the process of establishing that they had only attended because they'd been assured everything was handled. The family that had once been united on the side of that mountain was now splitting apart, and this time no one could blame me for it. The civil settlement, combined with what the bank recovered through the fraud process, eventually returned just over $22,000 to me, including legal costs and interest. It took 7 months to finalize. When the transfer cleared, I did nothing dramatic with it. I paid 2 months of rent ahead, added what I could to my TFSA, and bought a decent coffee maker for my new kitchen. I signed the final divorce paperwork on a gray Tuesday in February, a full year after the surgery. I signed in a building on King Street, in a room that smelled like old carpet and window cleaner. My husband wasn't present. His lawyer attended on his behalf. I walked out to the parking garage, sat in my car for a few minutes without starting the engine, and then drove home. I stopped at the Tim's on the way, large coffee, nothing else. My apartment had good morning light. My mother had come to help me move in 3 weeks earlier, and had made a point of hanging curtains on the first day, which she said was important for making a space feel like yours. She had been right about that. My sister-in-law sent me a message, eventually. It was long and carefully worded, and explained how she had only trusted what she was told, and how she had never imagined things would unfold the way they had, and how she hoped that someday I would come to understand that everyone had been dealing with a difficult situation. I read it twice. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because there was genuinely nothing in it that required anything from me. I think sometimes about waking up in that recovery ward and seeing the fraud alert and wanting so badly for it to be an error, a system glitch, some explainable mistake that would resolve itself by morning. I was half sedated and disoriented, and the easier thing, by far, would have been to assume that the people in my life were who I had believed them to be. But the notification was correct. The footage was correct. The timestamps, the text messages, the receipts. All of it was just what had happened, written down in a form that couldn't be rearranged into something more comfortable. The surgery repaired my appendix. That was its job, and it did it well. Everything else I had to repair myself, quietly, with folders of bank statements and certified medical records, and a lawyer who read things twice before speaking. It was slower work than surgery, and no one put you under for it, but it held. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sure exactly when that changed, but somewhere between the paperwork and the moving boxes, and the first morning I made coffee in my own kitchen, without waiting for someone else's noise to start the day, it did. What I have now is something quieter and more durable than anger. It's the kind of peace that doesn't need anyone else to acknowledge it in order to stay. The kind that belongs to you completely, and no one can charge to someone else's account. That kind, I've decided, is the only kind worth keeping.